welcome to Valley to Vietnam. Valley to Vietnam is a joint effort between the Sacramento Public Library and the Vietnam Veterans of America, Chapter 500. It's our intent to trace the arc of experience between Sacramento and Vietnam for our local Vietnam-era vets. Today our guest is Cy Rickards. Cy is someone I've known for over 40 years now. So Cy, where did you grow up?
Well, I was born in New York City.
Uh-huh. And so your father was in the service. What branch of the service was he in?
He was in the Navy.
Okay.
And he went in, I guess the equivalent of OCS, in early 1942.
Yeah.
He was in both the Atlantic and Pacific theaters.
So many of us, had fathers who were in World War II. A lot of people our age, and I think many of us who did go in the service wanted to be like our fathers, and we'll talk about that a little later, but I could see you as a Navy guy, for instance. And you had brothers and sisters, or what?
Two brothers.
Two brothers.
Both younger, yeah.
Okay. So you went to high school outside of Trenton?
Yeah.
Okay.
Ewing High School.
Okay.
Ewing Township High School.
Is that a Catholic high school?
No.
Okay. Just about at 17 now, you graduated from high school in 1958, if I remember right. And at that time we had a draft.
Yep.
Hell, they even got Elvis,
Yeah,
so they could draft anybody in those days. Like a lot of young men, you decided to join the service at that time and just fulfill your military obligation.
Yeah, a lot of people at that time, there was the draft. I don't remember what deferments there were, but the high school I was in, maybe a third of the people went to college. There was a big GM plant near there.
Uh-huh.
And so a lot of people worked at the plant and made decent money without college education, so there were a lot of people who weren't going to go to college.
Right.
And a lot of them didn't want to get drafted, so it was very typical to join the reserves of the National Guard.
Uh-huh. So you joined the Marine Corps Reserve?
Yeah, it was an artillery battalion.
And you had a 6-month active duty obligation?
Yeah, they had a 6 months active duty program then. So you went to boot camp, that was 13 weeks of fun and frolic. And then you went to Camp Lejeune. We went to Camp Lejeune. Everybody went for a month of infantry training, basic infantry training, and then the regulars who were not in the reserve units went off to assignments, and the reserve people stayed another 2 months for advanced infantry training, and then you went back to your reserve unit. So you got to learn all the small arms and machine guns and mortars. Went through all of that.
A lot of people have in their heads what they think boot camp is like. Maybe they think it's like Full Metal Jacket or whatever, but can you give us a little feel for boot camp?
Well, I'm glad I was 17. I was in pretty good shape. I was young and dumb and motivated.
Yeah.
So it wasn't so tough, but it's a bit of a shock. People are not ready for it.
Right.
Why would they be? You get your head shaved and you've got 3 drill instructors. We had a training platoon, about 65, and 3 drill instructors. And they are on you like a cheap suit from the time you wake up until the time you go to sleep.
Then you came home after that 6 months of duty.
Right.
And at this point you were thinking about going to college, and you applied to some colleges, right?
Yeah, I did. And my plan was to go to Trenton State Teachers College and work.
And you also applied for the Naval Academy?
Yeah, I had applied for the Naval Academy my senior year in high school. I didn't get in. And I reapplied the next year when I was on active duty. I went up to, I think it was New Bern, North Carolina.
Yeah, I know that town.
And my congressman had you list service academies in order of preference. So I did.
What was your order?
The Naval Academy, West Point, and the Air Force Academy.
Okay.
And so what happened in that spring that I was back, which I guess would be the spring of '59, I got a letter completely out of the blue that said that the candidate who had gotten chosen I was an alternate, decided not to go. Would I like to go?
To
the Air Force Academy.
Now, my guess is that all the academies are all rigorous, probably fairly equally rigorous, and you probably found the Air Force Academy as you called it a summer fourth class.
Fourth class summer.
What is this, sort of a test to see if you're going to cut it or what?
I think we had 750 in our class. We lost 150 by December that year.
Okay.
And the vast majority of those opted out.
Right.
I mean, they didn't flunk out because
Yeah.
of grades. Because part of the boot camp atmosphere lasted then a whole year.
Yeah.
I mean, you sat at attention when you ate, you ran with your eyes straight ahead. There were always people there to greet you, upperclassmen,
Yeah.
get you to stop and check out your shoes and run your chin back in.
Right.
But the summer was a surprise. I thought I was a badass Marine.
Right.
Fourth class summer at the Air Force Academy was harder than Marine Corps boot camp.
Wow.
I think simply because there were more people harassing you.
Yeah, the ratio of harassers to students was much heavier.
Yeah, because you had upperclass, and they were all upperclassmen.
Right.
And the other thing was, the academy is at 7,200 feet.
Whoa.
So you can imagine if you come from someplace like Trenton, which is on the Delaware River,
Yeah.
And they start running you around, holding rifles, you form a bond with the people you're with.
Sure. Yeah.
So.
As you know by that recent
And when you go to
reunion you went
and when
to.
you go to the reunion, everybody's, the older you get, the tougher you were.
Yeah. Right. Now, one thing that was kind of interesting that I found interesting, at least, was the difference between cleaning a rifle in South Carolina versus Colorado, or at least Fort Collins, or not Fort Collins, but Colorado Springs.
Colorado Springs, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because you were in the Army, and where were you, Bragg?
I was at Bragg and Benning.
And Benning. And that humidity, I remember, if you touched your rifle, it rusted.
Yeah.
I mean, immediately.
Right.
Well, just by happenstance, we had to clean the rifles and get them inspected at the Air Force Academy, and we had M1s just like we did in the Marines at that time. What I discovered was you could run the parts of the rifle under the hot water, let it dry, and it was instantly dry at 7,200 feet. There was no rust, and you didn't have any of that nonsense about oiling it up and, of course, then getting every piece of lint floating around,
right.
which you caught a great deal of grief about.
So, I mean, does it get less harassment as suddenly when you're a third year, are you harassed?
Oh, it's
less?
completely different.
Is it?
Completely different.
Yeah.
I mean, you no longer have to eat at attention.
Okay.
And you sit there at your chair with your eyes down on your plate, and they ask you questions while you're supposed to be eating. You learn useful tricks like being able to flip a brownie into your hat, which is below you on the chair, and put your hat on and sneak the brownie back to your room. Things that will last you a lifetime. You get a little bit of harassment from the upperclassmen when you're a third classman, sort of sophomore.
Right.
And your freshman year, when we were there, you didn't get off at all. I mean, we didn't go home for Christmas.
There's honor violations, I take it.
Well, we had an honor code then,
Yeah.
and if you violated the honor code, you were gone. Yeah. The honor code was, we will not lie, cheat, or steal, nor tolerate among us those who do. So
Right.
I had a roommate my sophomore year who had been in the Air Force before as an enlisted man, and was a real smart ass like I was, and we managed to really make people angry because we would win best room in the squadron week after week.
Wow.
And it made them really, we didn't have the proper attitude.
Well, and you had an advantage having been in the Marine Corps. I mean, you came there and you had a big jump on a lot of these guys.
Certainly the first year, because I knew how to do manual of arms.
Right.
I knew how to march. I knew how to salute. I knew how to shine shoes.
Yeah.
And all those professionally useful traits it takes a long time to learn them and do them right. So that was a help.
So in 1963 you graduate.
Right.
And now they're going to send you to additional training, right?
Yeah.
Is this where you they determine which kind of branch you're going to go in within the Air Force, or?
Yeah, most people went to pilot training, and I did, and I washed out of pilot training.
I imagine it's pretty rigorous.
Yeah, and a quarter of my class was gone in 2 months. Things were different when there was a war.
Yeah.
But, you know, it just happened. It was a big, huge disappointment, but it happens, and, you know, so you move on, and I went to intelligence school in Denver after that.
Okay.
And that's kind of what I did.
And that was a lengthy program.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember, 10 months, I think.
Wow.
Maybe 8 months, but
Yeah.
it was a good long program.
So once you finish Intel school, then you're going to get an intelligence assignment someplace. Where did you go after that?
I went to U.S. Air Force headquarters, Europe, in Wiesbaden, Germany.
Okay, near Frankfurt?
It's near Frankfurt. I think it's around 20 miles down the river.
And your job there was?
Well, I was an analyst. So, and we had to go through a whole nother clearance rigmarole. Primarily what we did was keep track of Soviet and East European air forces. So all those countries in the Soviet bloc, Czechoslovakia, Poland, had their own air forces and then Soviet air forces. And we kept track of those, briefed senior officers. And then I was there during the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, and we would go in at 2 or 3 in the morning and study the intelligence take and work with a audio-visual person and present a briefing to the commanding general in the morning. So
okay.
It was interesting.
So you were in Germany for 3 years then?
Yeah.
Okay. And then next you can probably determine where you're going to go.
Well, actually, no.
Oh. You can volunteer.
Well, I did, actually.
Okay.
But I volunteered to go to Southeast Asia after a couple of years, and they just said, wait till the end of your tour, you'll be gone, and I was.
Okay.
So I went to Tanzania and Saigon.
So that was July of '67.
Yeah.
And you're going to be there a year.
Yep.
So you're going to be there during Tet.
Yeah, we were.
And so were your duties pretty much the same there, or just a different enemy?
Pretty much the same, but different enemy. And
yeah.
we kept track of North Vietnamese air order battle, where the small amount of planes they had, where they were, and then mostly North Vietnamese air defenses.
Okay. And then you folks are directing air from there, mostly with fighters, or?
Well, there were a number of bases other bases in Vietnam and in Thailand, and then the Navy.
Right.
And the primary, we were looking at North Vietnam. So when we were bombing North Vietnam, it was mostly Air Force out of Thailand, Navy out of the Tonkin Gulf. We gave the briefings to the senior commanders. The bases would have wing commanders, and they would get orders.
Right.
At, both bombing in North Vietnam, interdicting hopefully the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and then there was air support for ground combat operations.
And most of the aircraft that you were dealing with, you mentioned, were F-4s and
the
105s.
The fighter aircraft were F-105s, F-4s, and then there were lots of there were smaller aircraft. As the war progressed, they actually had some propeller aircraft there. And then the old C-130, which has been around forever, which is for those who don't know, 4-engine prop plane, turboprop. They'd fly them with all kinds of guns out the side of them.
Right.
Gatling guns.
Yeah.
During Tet, we would stand in the door of the Quonset hut where we worked, and we could watch the tracers from the 130s coming down.
So you're there during Tet, and during Tet, then your headquarters is attacked along with just about everything else in Vietnam. And how did that go?
Well, it was interesting because we were the headquarters. This was as rear echelon as you could get. So there were flower beds around the buildings, no sandbags. And all of a sudden, fortunately we didn't get hurt too bad. There were people killed on the base from mortar and rocket attacks. The base never got overrun, but they got fairly close. We could stand in the second story of the barracks and watch the F-4s drop ordnance. Not too far away.
That's close.
It was close enough.
Yeah.
As I said, it's the only time I was happy to see the Army.
Okay.
So yeah.
So
the base got hit a bunch for a while.
Yeah. So then your tour is up in July of that year.
Yeah.
And you're sent where now?
I was sent to go to the University of Pittsburgh to get a master's degree with the objective I was assigned to become a member of the faculty in the political science department of the Air Force Academy.
Okay. So coming back, let's see, you've been gone, well, from the States since '63, and you're pretty well tied down in the academy for 4 years before that. So how did you find the United States coming back in '68 versus '63?
We went from the 50s to the 60s, and I missed it until I came back.
Right, that was a huge change.
Well, I got to Germany in '64,
came
back to the States in '68. And so if you can think about the change, and then I went, not only did I come back in '68, I went to a college campus.
Right.
So it was just totally different world.
Yeah.
Completely different world.
Were there active demonstrations on the campus at that time?
Sure.
Or? Okay, against the war.
Yeah.
Yeah. And did you start to feel anything about that, or
well,
what?
It was. I did. I started to really second guess what we were doing in Vietnam when I was there. I think everybody who's there, and the closer you are to getting shot, the less you get a chance to think about that kind of stuff. Because you're just focused on staying alive and getting the heck out of there after your year in country.
Right.
When you're rear echelon, you can think about things a little bit. And I lived in a house with 5 other guys, and we used to talk about what was going on. And it just seemed to me that we maybe shouldn't have been doing what we were doing, which was difficult because you have this bond with all these people.
Sure.
Classmates who were flying combat missions, classmates who got shot down. On the other hand, you start not to really believe in what we're doing there and where we should have been there. And,
right.
And that was hard. And then you go, you have a complete culture shift and go to a campus. First coming back to the country. And people in the military did not come back to a welcoming, appreciative populace in those days.
Sadly, that's true.
And then all these demonstrations. So anyway, I began to question the war, and then I guess I began to question whether I should stay in, because it seemed to me, as I kind of developed this feeling about not thinking we ought to be involved in the war, that I was not a kind of person that should go teach cadets. Because you have to be honest with yourself and other people, and they don't. I mean, it didn't feel right for me to go teach cadets, feeling the way I did about the war. So I sent in I resigned. But of course, once you tell the powers that be that you don't want to play anymore, so that they're
going to make your life
the Air Force
harder.
kept me. I mean, I wasn't taken to a secret site and waterboarded.
or put in the brig.
But the Air Force kept me for a while longer, and that meant I had to stay in the Air Force longer.
Okay.
They kept me at Pitt.
And you got out in '71?
Yeah, September.
Okay. So you're back, and you know all about weapons and how to shine shoes and all that sort of thing, and
all that useful thing.
Yeah. So where do you land in '71?
Well, I stayed in northern Michigan. My wife at the time was working as a counselor at a public school. We stayed through the school year, and then moved to California.
And you had a son at that time?
Yeah, he was living with his mom in California.
Oh, okay.
He was born in Germany. She came over and we got married in Germany.
Uh-huh.
Actually, I had two marriages during that period, neither of which worked out very well. Not through any fault of my wives, but just didn't work out. So
right.
Came to California. My parents were living here, my son was living here, and eventually I lived in the East Bay for a while,
mm-hmm.
worked at the Lucky Meat Plant driving a forklift. But I was working swing shift and it was kind of tough. I'm trying to have my son with us.
Right.
So I got a job with the state of California.
Okay.
Long story short.
And
moved to Davis.
And soon after that, you decided to go to law school.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the years, but I think it was 2 or 3 years later.
Uh-huh.
When we worked together at the Office of Criminal Justice Planning, where I got that word, I started to think about law school because I had a number of friends in Davis who were lawyers.
Uh-huh.
And they encouraged me to apply to law school, and I had GI Bill, so after 2 or 3 years I applied to law school.
And you initially go to school?
At Catholic University in Washington, D.C. That was I was 36, I don't remember what it was, 80, 79. So it would have been 79, 78, 77, yeah. It's 3 years and I graduated in 1980.
But you graduated from a different school, right?
Yeah, I came out, I moved back to California. My son came back to live with me. The plan was I would go to law school in D.C. for a year and he would live with his mom the first year, and then the second year he'd come to D.C. But he was scared to move to D.C. and so I came back to California my 3rd year and he came back to live with me.
Okay.
And I finished law school at Davis.
Okay, and then you worked a couple of kind of short stint jobs, and then you had an opportunity to go to work for first the state public defender and then next Sacramento County.
Well, I didn't work at the state public defender.
Right, but I mean you had an offer.
I had I had a friend, Mr. Tribe, who he talked me up to people at the FPPC, Fair Political Practice Commission, and I went to work there. I had worked at the state public defender when I was a 3rd-year law student.
Mm-hmm.
And I applied there, and toward the end of the year, when all the hotshots went off to clerkships and big paying jobs, I got an offer from the state public defender. And then, I believe I accepted it, and then somebody told me that the county was hiring, and I decided, I was 37 then, I guess,
mm-hmm.
and I decided, it wasn't, I was 40. I decided that I wanted to get trial experience because I was older, and if I didn't get it right away, I wouldn't get it.
Good thought.
And so I went to work for the county as a public defender.
So you had lots of trials.
Lots of trials.
And how long did you work there?
I worked there for, well, let's see, I worked there for most of the 80s.
Uh-huh.
I was out for a year lobbying. I was a lobbyist for the criminal defense bar, and then I went back, and I believe I went to the Attorney General's office in 1989.
Okay.
In the civil division, not criminal.
And you're still working kind of part-time today?
Yeah, I work half-time with the Covered California, the state health exchange.
Okay. And weren't you at the Lottery Commission at one point or something?
No, I didn't work for the lottery.
Oh, I thought gaming or somebody like that.
Oh,
yeah.
When I retired, and when I retired, I was chief counsel at the Gambling Control Commission.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
Now, sort of looking in retrospect here, and you've probably told us a little bit about this, but I mean, how did the war affect your life? I mean, you've talked a little bit about that, but I
think, directly, indirectly, it had a huge impact because I fully intended to have a career in the Air Force.
Uh-huh.
I mean, there wasn't any question about that. That's what I was going to do. So along comes the war and a change in my attitude, at least.
Uh-huh.
So I left the Air Force. I would have never gotten to be a public defender in Sacramento County. As a public defender in Sacramento County, I
never met your wife of 30 years now.
Who I looked at across met her in judges' chambers in municipal court. And we were married 30 years on the 7th of April.
And have 2 great kids.
And have 2 kids. So everything changed.
Right.
As it often does with people. You make one move to the right or to the left and you're down a whole different path.
Sure. And yet, you know, even though you decided to leave the military, you still have pretty positive feelings of having served.
Absolutely. It was funny. We had our 50th class reunion, and I get a little choked up.
That's okay. A lot of people do here. It's part of the process.
I think, you know, serving in the military was a great thing that happened to me. And going to the Air Force Academy, you were with people, and I sort of fought it, who were going to be careerists. But once I got in, and once I got assigned, and particularly when I was in Germany, there wasn't any doubt in my mind I was going to stay in for a career. And, you know, that was an era. Kennedy was president, got assassinated, but he spoke at our graduation. And this whole notion of public service was big. I mean, people thought working in public service, which means working for the government, which became frowned upon later on in politics.
Right.
People thought that was an honorable thing to do. And, you know, a lot of my classmates stayed in at least 20 years. So, yeah, I have good feelings about serving.
Well, you should. And you've done a lot with your life. I mean, I'm proud to have you as a friend, and I think you're a very honorable guy.
Well, thank you.
Well, Cy, I just want to thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you, Bob, for doing this. This is a great project.
So this concludes our time on Valley to Vietnam. I'd like to thank Cy and say welcome home to him and all the vets. For the Valley to Vietnam producer Jerry Ward and director James Scott, I'm Bob Tribe saying so long, and we'll see you next time.